It's the 2022 World Cup. It's the squad update for France. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin and today we'll be updating France's squad for the 2022 World Cup. The final squads are out, so here is the promised update mediacast where we look at the selections, the non-selections, the surprises, and the injury updates, especially for France, that we made in our full team podcast when we went through all the candidates and gave career and participation information there. And we also predicted the likelihood of making the squad there, so we're going to update our predictions here. We'll check how accurate those predictions were. And for France, there's no update of recent games because we actually did cover the September games in that mediacast, and they have not played any friendly games in the lead up here. So anyway, check the show notes for links to that full player and the group mediacast where we took a close look at the team, their history, and discussed their chances in this tournament. Today, I am wearing a Cardiff shirt. Okay, it's just a colour match, and that's as close as I could get. But I am always happy to wear the Cardiff shirt. And one of these days, I'll improve my shirt collection and actually get a French national team jersey. But that looks like it's down the road a little bit. All right, let's talk about the formations that they've been using in their games. So we are kind of focused on the September games there that YouTube watchers will see in orange at the end. But as I said, we covered the September games. So this is basically just a review. And they have used they started the Euro Cup there with a 4-3-3, and they've used it a few times since. In fact, started World Cup qualifying with that. So they seem to like to start with that. And I wouldn't actually be surprised to see them start here in the World Cup with that formation. But they tended to switch from that formation and go with a different one. So in World Cup qualifying and Nations League games, they used a 3-4-1-2 quite a bit. But in Nations League games, they went back to 4 at the back for a few of the games, so a 4-2-3-1 there. But they ended up with the 3-4-1-2 that they had used quite a lot in World Cup qualifying and in the previous season's Nations League finals. And that's what they used for the last 2 games. But one wonders how much the many injuries France has came into play in the decision of their formations. So again, I wouldn't be surprised if they start with the 4-3-3, but I'd have to say the 3-4-1-2 does seem to be their preferred formation. And those September games were the last 2 Nations League games, and France came second in the group there behind Croatia and Denmark, but ahead of Australia. So they remain in Nations League A next time around. And I'll just comment on the formations, or not the formations, but the players for the September games. By necessity, they were basically a scramble to find players to replace the many who were out injured. So it was kind of chaotic and made it difficult for us to predict who starters would be if starters didn't come back. And in this podcast, we'll update which ones came back and which one didn't. So those 2 games alone didn't yield many indications of who the starters would be in the World Cup. However, for those positions without injuries, especially the forward line, it seems that they use their starters, or at least the main candidates for starters. So it was by no means B teams by design, although it kind of looked that way as they brought in players to replace the injured starters, or I should say tried out players to replace the injured starter, because they often went through several players and didn't seem to decide, at least in the September games, who those starters would be. Okay, well, let's take a look at the squad, and our main task here is to say who made the squad and who didn't. And we'll start with the manager, Didier Deschamps. So He has been their manager since 2012 and remains so we will view him as a starter here. And for the next sections, we'll begin just by listing candidates, and then we will say which ones made it, and finally we will finish with a summary of the position. So for goalkeepers, we have definite candidates in Alphonse Areola and Mike Maignan, and likely candidates in Hugo Lloris. In the Full Player podcast, we justified why we put them in the category that we did, so we won't repeat that here. Many will be surprised to see Lloris as a likely, but we did have a reason for that. We have Steve Mandanda as a possible candidate, Benoit Costil as a possible but unlikely candidate, and well, we had noted in the Full Player podcast that Mike Maignan was injured, so we'll get to that in a moment. But we'll begin just by eliminating those who didn't make it. So Benoit Costil, the possible but unlikely candidate, not selected. Definite candidate Alphonse Areola was selected, but Mike Maignan remained injured. At the time of the Full Player podcast, it was listed as a calf injury, but the injury continued and is now listed as a disrupted calf muscle. So that looks a bit more specific and a bit more serious. He picked that injury up in early October, and when we did the previous podcast, he was expected back October 20th, but now the prognosis is January 2023. So it looked like that injury kind of became more serious, and he was expected back, but now is not. So he is listed as injured and not selected. Hugo Lloris, the likely candidate, no surprise to us, was selected, and Steve Mandanda also selected, probably replacing Mike Maignan there. Okay, well, let's look at the position. It was Hugo Lloris in the Cup and in World Cup qualifying and in the Nations League finals of the previous season. But he only played the first two games of the current Nations League, or the one that just finished. But Maignan played in three of them, and Areola in the last one, and that's what made us a little bit doubtful about Lloris as a starter, because he didn't play the last four games. But nevertheless, we had predicted that Hugo Lloris would be the starter despite missing those games, and we're going to stick with that here. Oh, I'm not supposed to highlight who made it here. No, at the end of the podcast, we'll talk about the starters. So that's where I'll highlight Hugo Lloris in green, although I kind of gave it away here, I must admit. Okay, let's move on to central defenders. And wow, we have so many names. We'll have Jules Koundé and William Saliba as definite candidates. And we have Lucas Hernandez, Pernell Kimpembe, and Raphael Varane as likely candidates. For possible candidates, we had Davo Upamecano, Benoit Badiashile, and Ibrahim Konate. And some of those were selected, so we won't eliminate them at this point. We have possible but unlikely candidate Kurt Zuma, but he was not selected. We have players seemingly off the squad, Clement Lenglet and Samuel Umtiti. We considered both of those off the squad, and neither of them made it. And then, as you can see on the graphic, if you're looking at it, several of these players were listed as injured. So we're going to go through that up here. And we also do have a new candidate, and I'll tell you about him momentarily here. His name is Axel Disasi, new candidate Axel Disasi. So that may indicate to you that some of these players did not recover from their injuries. So let's go back and look through them. Well, Jules Koundé was listed as injured when we did the previous podcast. Sorry, but he is recovered and was selected for the squad. So I'll just tell you a little bit about that. He had an Achilles tendon injury picked up in late September, just around the time of the international friendlies. No, they weren't friendlies, the Nations League games there. He recovered from that as expected to play from mid-October, but then he was out again with muscular problems in mid-November. However, he is not listed as injured, and the fact that he was selected supports that he is back to health. Okay, next we have William Saliba, who was selected for the squad. No injury concerns with him. Lucas Hernandez, the likely candidate, also selected, but he had a torn muscle bundle from mid-September, and at that time there had been no return date. But he did recover, and he was playing for his club in early November, so France can be happy that he recovered and was available for selection. However, Presnel Kimpembe was not. He picked up a hamstring injury in mid-September. The return date was unknown when we did the previous media cast, and it's still unknown of this recording. So he was not selected due to that injury. Raphael Varane was selected. However, he is, well, I'll tell you the situation. You can maybe make up your own mind. He picked up a leg injury in late October, and that lasted until November 13th, at least, because there were no games. There were no games scheduled after that, so we don't know. At that time, or when we did the previous podcast, his return date had been unknown, but he was selected for the squad, and he remains on the squad as of this media cast. So he was injured right up until the end, but was not listed as injured. So one wonders if he was kind of selected as an injured player in hopes of recovery. And if that's the case, one wonder if he's fit to play, especially in the first game. So technically he's recovered from injury, but I myself am a little bit suspicious that he may not really be fit to start. Okay, Dayot Upamecano was selected for the squad, even though he's just a possible candidate. Of course, some of these possible candidates getting their chance due to other players being injured. Benoit Badiashile was not selected, but Ibrahima Konate was, despite having an injury concern himself, which we mentioned in the previous podcast. It's going to be like this all the way through the media cast until we at least get to the forwards. So Ibrahima Konate returned to action in early October, although he mostly didn't play for his club. He only got one start on November 6th for them. So whether that's due to injury or non-selection, excuse me, he does seem to have overcome the injury, but was not playing. And finally, the new candidate, Agzursi Disasi, also selected for the squad, of course, brought in actually to replace Presnel Kimpembe. I think Kimpembe was actually on the squad, was selected for the squad, and then was replaced afterwards. So he was on November 14th. So selected for the squad on November 9th, but then withdrew on November 14th, and that's when Disasi came in. So central defense, just a real mess of injuries, but those are the candidates we now have. I'll run through them again. Jules Koundé, William Saliba, Lucas Hernandez, Raphael Varane, Davo Upamecano, and Ibrahima Konate, and newcomer Axel Disasi. the 7 central defenders that they have. That's a lot. Let's summarize the position then. It was steadily Kimpembe and Bahrain in the Euro Cup and going forward from that. But once the injuries hit, it became chaotic with numerous players being tried out. So Kimpembe, as we saw, is out and Bahrain is selected, but I think he may still be an injury doubt. So Koundé seemed the main replacement until he got injured, though he is recovered. And, you know, several other players kind of came in and out as they tried to handle the situation back there. Okay, let's move on to left backs, where it's not a whole lot different. We have a definite candidate in Lucas Digne and a likely candidate in Theo Hernandez. Don't mix him up with Lucas Hernandez, who is coded as a central defender. Lucas Hernandez, that is. We have possible candidate Ferland Mendy. And then, as we noted in the previous podcast, injury concerns for Lucas Digne and Theo Hernandez there. So 2 out of the 3 of them, but let's update you on that. And Lucas Digne, a bit of a strange situation there. So he had an ankle injury picked up in late September, just before the Nations League games there, and the return date at that time was unknown, but he did return to action a month later on October 29th, and he played 3 games. So it doesn't seem like he was not selected due to injury, because he seemed to be back in action. So we can only say that this is a non-selection decision, maybe the injury playing a role. But we are surprised because he was a definite candidate. So despite recovering, he was not selected for the squad. The likely candidate, Theo Hernandez, had an injury concern himself. It was a muscle tear injury picked up around the time of the September Nations League games, and there had been no return date posted for him either. But it did turn out to be a short-term injury just around that period at the end of September. And in fact, he was back in action by October 8th. So that injury concern was averted, and he was selected for the squad. And Ferland Mendy, you would imagine with Digne not being selected that he would be selected, but no, he was not selected for the squad, leaving them with just 1 left back available. So let's summarize the position. It seemed a matter of fitness with Theo Hernandez and Digne both being injury doubts, and we actually speculated the role might fall to third string Ferland Mendy just by default. But both recovered in time to play for their clubs, and we were thus surprised that Digne was not selected. And in light of that, you would guess that backup Mendy would be selected, but he wasn't either. So, yeah, they just go to the cup with Theo Hernandez, and presumably it will be an out-of-position player as backup if needed. And I'm thinking Lucas Hernandez, who played as a left back in the 2018 World Cup, but who is now coded as a central defender, may be the backup for Theo Hernandez. All right, moving on to right backs. We have definite candidates in Benjamin Pavard and Jonathan Klaus. No, sorry, Jonathan Klaus was a likely candidate there. So likely candidate Jonathan Klaus, and possible but unlikely Leo Dubois, and seemingly off the squad Nordi Mukiele. But neither of those were selected. So Leo Dubois and Nordi Mukiele not selected. Benjamin Pavard was selected, and Jonathan Klaus, despite being a likely candidate, was not selected. So same thing on the right side, just 1 candidate being brought to the cup, and presumably an out-of-position player will be the backup if Pavard becomes unavailable. All right, moving on to defensive midfielders. So we have Aurélien Tchouameni as a definite candidate, Aurélien Tchouameni, and a possible candidate Boubacar Kamara there, and he was also an injury concern. I'm highlighting them, but I didn't mean to do that, so I will unhighlight them. Okay, well, let's go through them. And Aurélien Tchouameni was selected for the squad, so I was right to highlight him. However, Boubacar Kamara was not selected, so let's talk about his injury. He had a knee injury, which he picked up in late September, again around the time of the September Nations League games there. And at that time, he had been expected back on November 22nd, so it was going to be a close shave. But he returned on November 6th. However, that would seem that he was available for selection, but he was not selected. So rather than being an injury, it seems to have been a non-selection decision. Again, his injury may have played a role in that, but regardless, he was not selected. And he was only a possible candidate in the first place, so not a big shock there. Okay, we'll cover the central midfielders before reviewing the position. So we have a definite candidate in Adrien Rabiot, and we have likely candidates in Paul Pogba and Matteo Guendouzi. And possible candidates, we have 4 of them: Eduardo Camavinga, N'Golo Kanté, Jordan Veretout, and Youssouf Fofana, all of them possible candidates. Seemingly off the squad is Corentin Tolisso, and he actually was not selected, so we'll remove him from the list. And we did have a couple of injury concerns here too, so we'll go back over the list and point out what we need to. So Adrien Rabiot was an injury concern, calf problems picked up in mid-September, with no break, actually, after having been out for a week with thigh problems. So he was listed as having a thigh problem, and before playing any further games was listed as having a calf problem. So he missed the international friendlies over those injuries, but he was back in action immediately afterwards in early October. So he is available to them and was selected, Adrien Rabiot. Paul Pogba, on the other hand, was in for knee surgery. So we had a note actually at the time of the Full Player podcast that he would be due back on October 25th. However, I wonder if we have made a mistake of some kind with that, and that wasn't the case. Anyway, he's now listed as due back on November 28th. And that is basically considered too late for the Cup. So they did not select him for the Cup. He is out with an injury. Matteo Guendouzi was selected for the squad, the likely candidate. Okay, and Eduardo Camavinga, the possible candidate, was selected. However, N'Golo Kanté was not. So he picked up a hamstring injury in March 2022. And interestingly, he did return for 1 Nations League game in June, but with just 1 international game. I'm not sure if he played club games there, but he must have re-injured it because he's been out since. So it looks like he recovered, quickly re-injured it, and has been out since June. So the return date on him is still unknown, but it's been known for a while that he would be out for the Cup. So N'Golo Kanté, a big loss, I feel, to them in the midfield. And the other players, Jordan Veretout and Youssouf Fofana, probably being selected because of those injuries, to their good fortune. Both of them selected. So let's discuss the position then. So just for your information, it's one central midfielder about a third of the time. That would be, say, in the 4-3-3 formation. And about 2/3 of the time, it is two central midfielders. So let's think of the 4-2-3-1 formation, for example. So generally, it was Conte when it was just one central midfielder, and Pogba joined him when it was two. However, as time progressed, both were in and out with injury. Pogba more in and out than Conte. So it looked like they turned to Rabiot and Tchouaméni. Both of those made inroads even during the World Cup qualification games, and both of them playing at least 3 games there. But more recently, they've been trying out different players, and it's been a mishmash with no one emerging enough to really indicate a starter. So we'll come back to that when we predict our starters at the end, but that's not going to be easy. Okay, let's move on to left midfielders. And here as a candidate, we have Ousmane Dembele, and he was just at the possible level. And we also had a player seemingly off the squad in Thomas Lemar. Well, Thomas Lemar is off the squad, or at least for this World Cup. However, Ousmane Dembele was chosen, was selected for the squad. So we'll just summarize this position by saying that we had noted Rabiot had played the position when it was a 3-man midfield. Again, they didn't use that formation that much. But for the most part, in the later games, it was a variety of players. And with the September games, they didn't use a 3-man midfield, just a 2-man midfield. So the position wasn't used. So that'll be true on the right as well. On the right for candidates, we have Kingsley Coman as a likely candidate, but we also noted that he too was an injury concern. So let's update that. In the previous podcast, we had reported a hamstring injury with no return date, but is now listed as a torn muscle fiber picked up in mid-September. He returned to action, though, in early October and in plenty of time for the Cup. So he was selected for the squad. So let's summarize the right midfielder position. As on the left, the position is not often used. And when it is, it's a central midfielder playing the role. In this case, primarily Tchouaméni, and with less variation than on the left side. But again, it was a 2-man midfield for the September Nations League game, so no information on right midfielders there. Anyway, Kingsley Coman selected, and let's move on to left wingers. And for left wingers, we have a likely candidate in Moussa Diaby. No, sorry, that's a possible candidate in Moussa Diaby. And we had a player seemingly off the squad in Marcus Thuram. Okay, well, Moussa Diaby, the possible candidate, was not selected. However, Marcus Thuram, surprisingly, was selected. So even though he last appeared in the 2021 Euro Cup, kind of brought in from the cold there. And he was actually late in being named to the squad. So they named the squad on November 9th, and he was added after 5 days. They had only selected 25 players. So presumably they were waiting on him and perhaps a couple of other players to see who would be fit for the squad. And he was added. He himself had abdominal influenza, so was a doubt, but he was added to the squad. His return had been expected on November 21st, so it was a kind of a close call. Actually, that must have been a fairly recent condition, because he didn't miss any of his club games up until the end of his club season. So I'm guessing in the week between the end of the club season and the final selection of the squad, that's when he got sick. But anyway, he's okay, and he will be on the squad, left winger Marcus Thuram. So let's summarize the position. Not a lot to say here. We actually saw that it was always a left back pushing up to play this role. So really, we're surprised with the sudden return of Thuram. I'm not really sure what they have in mind for him, as the defenders usually play the winger role, and we'll see that on the right side too. In fact, there are no candidates here, and here too it's usually a right defender pushing up to play this role. But on the right side, in fact, right midfielder Coman sometimes stepped into the role as the right winger. So not always the outside back on the right. Okay, let's move on to the forward line, and we begin with attacking midfielders. And this position, we don't have any candidates actually here, because the players who play in this position, as well as the left and right forwards or left and right attacking midfielders, they're all the players who are listed primarily as forwards. So we'll just talk about the position here. As mentioned, the attacking midfielders will be played by a forward, and in the centre it's usually Griezmann or secondary striker Christopher Nkunku, who we'll talk about momentarily. On the left, it's usually Mbappe. He was replaced a few times, but not by anyone who seemed like a challenger for the position. And on the right, it was Griezmann for the first part of the period, but less so in the second half, as he moved to a central attacking midfield position. So in the case where he wasn't playing on the right, the position was played by a different forward, which we'll meet those forwards right away here. Okay, so we move on to secondary strikers, and the only player coded so is Christopher Nkunku. And Christopher Nkunku was selected for the squad. However, he was withdrawn on the 20th of November. It must have been the 19th of November. Anyway, I guess they were waiting to see if he would recover, and decided that he wouldn't be fit to play. So in his case, he had not been an injury concern when we did the previous media cast, Christopher Nkunku. In fact, he was, as we said, selected and was injured in training with France. And that must have been a day or two before the tournament began. And he was replaced with Randall Kolo Muani, who was one of the possible forwards that we'll be looking at soon. So yet another injury, actually the injury plague touching the front line in recent days. So Christopher Nkunku not selected there. So let's look at the forwards. We have quite a few names to deal with here, so we'll go through them. So definite candidates, we had Karim Benzema, Antoine Griezmann, and Kylian Mbappe. And likely candidate, Olivier Giroud. Possible candidate, Wissam Ben Yedder and Randall Kolo Muani. And possible but unlikely candidates, Anthony Martial, and seemingly off the squad, Jonathan Ikone. And I'll just remove Ikone from the list because he was not selected. And Anthony Martial will remove from the list too. He also had an injury concern, so he had been out with a hamstring all season long. Martial had injury concerns. So it began with a hamstring injury at the start of the club season in August, but he returned to play one game on August 22nd. And then immediately he was out with an Achilles irritation from late August until late September. So that's when we did the Full Player podcast, and we had reported no return date. However, he returned quickly on October 2nd and played 2 games, even scoring 2 goals in the first of these. And And then after 2 games, he was out with a back problem for 4 weeks. So he returned in early November before the squad was named, actually, so was technically fit, but then was not selected. So we have to say technically it's a non-selection decision, but you can't help but think that the manager thought this guy is really injury prone, and that's the last thing we need on the squad is more injury concerns. So I suspect he was left out more because of the injuries than because of the selection, but also for lack of playing time would also factor into it. Okay, let's go back. So Anthony Martial, we removed from the list. Let's go back to the beginning. And Karim Benzema, an injury problem. Can you believe it? The bad luck that they've had. So Karim Benzema, muscular problem injuries picked up in mid-September, and he had been struggling with it since, though he did play on and off, including playing on November 2nd. So he had overcome calf problems too that had kept him out of international games in March. But for the recent injury, his return date was unknown, but it looked like it was a close one. So they selected him for the squad. Named to the squad until they apparently decided that he wouldn't recover in time, and the expected return date has now been updated to December 12th. So that decision was made on November 20th. Am I making a mistake here? Yes, I am. Nkunku withdrew injured on November 15th, actually. So I was mistaken in thinking it was a couple of days before the Cup. However, Nkunku was injured in training with France. Benjamin, on the other hand, was a wait and see, and then they decided that he wouldn't be fit to make the squad. So Karim Benzema, another big loss to France, some of their biggest players here. Not selected due to, or kind of unselected due to injury. And they actually haven't named his replacement yet. So recent was this decision that we don't have a replacement, but they will probably name a replacement for number 19 on the squad there. Okay, and Antoine Griezmann and Kylian Mbappe, blessedly no injury concerns with them, so they were both selected as we would guess. Olivier Giroud then was a likely candidate, but now becomes more important to them. Possible candidate Wissam Ben Yedder was not selected. Was not selected, so we'll remove him. And Randall Kolo Muani was not selected either. However, he was brought back in to replace Christopher Nkunku, as we saw. So he benefiting from the injury there and being selected for the squad. So our long list of forwards reduced to just 4 players: Antoine Griezmann, Kylian Mbappe, Olivier Giroud, and Randall Kolo Muani. So let's summarize the positions here. Of forward. So we saw that these players play central and right and left as central and right and left forwards there. So we'll just summarize the center forward line. And yes, again, Mbappe, Griezmann, and Benzema made up the forward line in some combination. That might be 1 attacking midfielder and 2 forwards, or 3 forwards, or something like that. But Benzema was the centre forward, I think, all of the time, or at least most of the time. However, we saw that he was injured in September, so it was Olivier Giroud who replaced him in both September games. And now it looks likely that Giroud will be the starting centre forward. Wow, unbelievable. I've never had a podcast like that with so many injuries to talk about. So poor France. Anyway, let's look at some of the statistics of the French squad, and I maybe will do this quickly here. the average age is 26.5, so we're finding actually this to be on the young side. I think in any other World Cup it would be on the older side, but in this World Cup the average age is 27, or at least of the teams I've done so far, which is about 2/3 of them. 27 the average age. The average number of caps, okay, we'll just take a look at a couple of things here. So they have 4 players who are 33 or older, and they have, 3 players who are 22 or younger. We'll take a quick look at some of the names here. I'll give you a moment to guess, see if you can figure out who the 4 are before I talk about it here. Okay, clock is ticking. Wait for it. Okay, your time is up. Here we go. The 4 players are Steve Mandanda at 37 years old, Olivier Giroud at 36, Hugo Lloris at 35, and actually Karim Benzema. I did up the statistics before he left the team, so he was 34. So I guess that makes it 3 players who are 33 or younger. Beyond that, though, Antoine Griezmann is 31 years old, and everyone else is below 30 years old. At the other end of the scale, Aurélien Tchouameni is 22 years old, William Saliba 21, and Eduardo Camavinga 20 years old. They have 5 players who are 23 years old too. We won't go through them, but Kylian Mbappe is one of them. Okay, the average number of caps for France is 34.4, and that is actually bang on average. The average is 34.2. So yeah, with quite a few younger players, I'm not surprised that it's lower than average, and I don't think there's anything significant about that. So I'll just give the list and look at the main ones, and we'll move on. So Hugo Lloris with 139 caps, Olivier Giroud with 114, and Antoine Griezmann with 110. Everyone else has less than 100, but Benzema has 97 and Varane 87. And then it drops down to Kylian Mbappe, just 23 years old, but with 59 caps. What about that? Okay, and then we have 3, 6, 9, 12 players with 10 caps or less. I won't go through the names there, but again, that's where it kind of balances out, so that the high numbers of a few players at the top is balanced out by the low numbers of quite a few more players at the bottom. Total goals for France is 179 goals, and so they have a very high scoring average of 20.1% goals per cap. So that number in itself doesn't mean much. It's just a way of comparing teams. That makes them the highest scoring team. They're 26 players, the highest scorers in World Cup here, by quite a margin. Actually, the average is 13.5%, and even some of the top teams, Brazil with 16.9%. Actually, Canada, I might as well point out, is 15.3%. They did very well in qualifying, and I'm looking for Argentina because I'm sure they're up there. Yeah, 18.5%. So Argentina the second highest, but France fully 1.6% higher than them. So amazing. And they retain most of their forwards, so I'm not really worried that their scoring prowess will suffer that much. Okay, so let's take a look. Olivier Giroud has 49 caps in 114 goals. That is 43% scoring ratio, so almost, I would say, a goal every 2.5 games. Actually, Kylian Mbappe beats him there with 47.5%, so he almost scores a goal every second game. And Griezmann has 38.2%. Those are very good scoring ratios. The other ones, though, the other players on the field are not so high. So we have a couple around 15%, a lot of them defenders, actually. But it looks like the midfield players don't actually score that much. I suppose if your forwards are putting in the goals as regularly as France's forwards, you maybe don't need players trying too hard to score a goal. So anyway, those are impressive numbers. Let's move on to the summaries section. And so we'll begin. We're going to mostly go by names here, unless I didn't talk about it above. But let's begin with notable non-selections. So Lucas Digne, we have here, because it seems like he recovered from his injuries, and despite being a definite candidate for us, was not selected. Now, it may have been because those injuries kind of linger on or left him unfit or what have you. It's hard to tell, but we have to conclude that it's a non-selection there. Boubacar Kamara, same story. He was an injury concern, but he was back to playing, but the possible candidate was not selected. Maybe we shouldn't have him on this list because he was only a possible candidate. But legitimately, Jonathan Klaus was not selected. The likely candidate had no injury concerns, but simply wasn't selected. Anthony Martial, we talked about in the podcast, and really shouldn't be on this list because he was a possible but unlikely candidate to begin with. He also returned to health at the end there, but was not selected for the squad, either due to non-selection or to concern over the many injuries he suffered during the last half year. Okay, so Marcus, next category is surprise inclusions. So the only real surprise to us there was Marcus Thurman. He hadn't appeared for the national team since the 2021 Euro Cup, and yet was called in from the cold. Here, the Borussia Mönchengladbach player. New candidates. Oh, it looks like I actually didn't look up the information on this player, so I don't know much about him. But we'll just introduce his name, Axel Disasi. So I can tell you that he plays for Monaco in France and is 24 years old, born in 1998. But he doesn't have any caps for France, and I don't think he appeared on the bench because he would have appeared on my radar if he had. So really out of the blue there. Okay, and updates on injuries. So we have four categories. So the first one is players who have recovered from injuries. So we have Jules Koundé. We won't repeat the information about their injury because we talked about that. We have Ibrahim Konate there. We have Lucas Hernandez recovering from injury and being selected. All of these players were selected. Theo Hernandez, the left back. The first three, by the way, were centre backs, so they were really ravaged in that position. Central midfielder Adrien Rabiot overcame injury, as did Kingsley Coman, the right midfielder. And also Marcus Thurman had also been an injury concern. That was illness, though, not an injury concern. So, as unlucky as France have been, they could have been more unlucky with some of these players being out. So 7 players who recovered from their injuries. Injury doubts is players who are still on the roster but are struggling with injury. And there we have Raphael Varane. So he was selected for the squad, but you got to wonder if he's fit to play. In fact, some of the other ones who we have above as recovered from injury, I'm a bit skeptical too. Jules Koundé and Ibrahim Konate, particularly, I wonder if they've really recovered from their injury there. Anyway, players who are dropped due to injury, we have goalkeeper Mike Maignan and central defender Pascal Kimpembe And central midfielders, Paul Pogba and N'Golo Kanté. And we have forwards, Christopher Nkunku, Christopher Nkunku, actually a secondary striker there, and Karim Benzema. All of them dropped due to their injuries. So shocking, really. And then players who were injured but were not a strong candidate. We might put Anthony Martial in this category, but technically it was a non-selection there. So, okay, let us finish the podcast with the predicted starters in this mess of injuries. So, goalkeeper is pretty. We begin with manager Didier Deschamps. We will call him a starter. Goalkeepers, the candidates are Alphonse Areola, Hugo Lloris, and Steve Mandanda. And we had nominated Hugo Lloris as the starter, despite missing those last 4 games of Nations League, or not starting those games. We're going to stick with Hugo Lloris as the starter. Central defenders, candidates are Jules Koundé, William Saliba, Lucas Hernandez, Rafael Varane, Dayot Upamecano, and Ibrahima Konate, and the newcomer Axel Disasi. Pernell Kimpembe injured there, as Mike Maignan was among the goalkeepers. So among the central defenders, with all the injury doubts and no clear candidates replacing them, we couldn't pin down our guess or our prediction as a starter in the full-length podcast. Now that Koundé and Varane are recovered, we think they'll be starters, but again, we really have doubts as to Varane's true fitness, so we're going to put him as a maybe. So we will highlight Koundé in green and Varane in yellow to indicate kind of a possible starter. If he's fully fit, though, we think Varane would start. Left backs, well, they only have one candidate, so we think Theo Hernandez, that candidate is going to be the starter. And same on the right side, whatever competition there was for the position were not selected. So Benjamin Pavard, the only candidate left standing there, so we think he will be a starter. Defensive and central defenders, with both Kanté and Pogba, who we consider the starters, with both of them out injured, we really have no idea who will start, and that's what we said in the previous podcast. A bit of a closer analysis, though. I felt that Tchouaméni seems the most likely, having started both games in September, and I'm actually going to go as far as to highlight him in green as a definite starter. Rabiot was out with a calf injury for those September games, and 2 different players played alongside Tchouaméni. So really, it's anybody's guess as to who they will use. And it's possible they may use just one central midfielder, Tchouaméni. On the left midfield, we predicted that it's going to be a 2-man midfielder, though. For September friendlies, it was a 2-man midfield, so no evidence given there. And we actually think the position of left midfielder will probably not be used. Dembele has not started enough to be considered a starter. The only player in that position, so we think he'll be on the bench. On the right midfield, Coman has only had a few starts, and actually in various positions. He started on the forward line a couple of times, and also as a left or as a right defender, so pretty versatile. However, he was injured for September games, so there's not enough evidence to suggest that he would be a starter. The only thing I'm fairly sure about is that he won't be used as a right midfielder, the position for which he is coded. Okay, left wingers. We're surprised with the sudden return of Marcus Thuram, but we don't see him as a starter. Rather, we expect the left back to push up into the position if they go with a 3-man defense. Same on the right side here too. We expect the right back to push up to play this role when it's used. However, it is possible that Coman would take the role again. But again, we haven't seen it enough to nominate him as a starter. So no one there. For secondary strikers, we'll deal with left attacking midfielders and left forwards, and on the right side, all under forwards. So left central attacking midfielders. We looked to the forwards to start here. Likely Griezmann, but Nkunku did play the position more in the second half of the period we were talking about, which was after the Euro Cup all the way to June 20. No, we did September 2022 for France. So Nkunku is out. So if they have a central attacking midfielder, it could be Griezmann or another forward. Not that they have a lot to choose from here. Left attacking midfielder, we thinking Mbappe has the position down cold. For Griezmann, we think he might play as a right forward or as a central attacking midfielder, just depending on the formation. But we definitely think he will be a starter. So Griezmann and Mbappe, both of them starters. And for centre forward, well, we would have chosen Benzema if he had not been injured. But anyway, Giroud replaced him when he was injured for the September game, so we expect it'll be Giroud used as a starter. And yeah, a bit concerning that they only have one other forward to sub in as a forward, so they'll probably have to be using out of position players. Or I mean, it's very likely actually that they will bring in another forward to replace Benzema there, because they definitely need support in that position. Okay, well, we are going to finish with closing thoughts on France, and rather than repeating everything we said in the team podcast when we discussed their prospects, we answer this question. Does the selection change our opinion about France's chances? So, well, we knew about some of the injuries when we talked about them, but holy smokes, the sheer number of injuries, how can it not affect their chances? You know, I mean, they won the cup last time, and this has definitely got to put a dent in that possibility. How far it will affect them, it's hard to say. I mean, France is very blessed in terms of their candidates. They have so many candidates that there are players playing for major clubs in Europe, especially, that don't even make it onto the team. So they may be able to cover cover these losses to a degree, but it's hard to imagine that they would cover missing players like Kante and Benzema and really important players like that. So I gotta say, I don't know how much it will affect their chances, but we think it will affect their chances, and they go in as a weaker team and maybe couldn't be expected to get to the final as they did in 2018. But of all the teams that can bear losses this heavy, France is one of them. So they still bring a good team to the cup. Okay, those are our closing thoughts, and that brings us to the end of this mediacast. Keep in mind, we may be editing together a list of the bios of the 26 final candidates. If we do that, it'll just be an editing job on the Full Player podcast, though. And if we do it, it'll come out. Well, I'm falling behind a bit in these podcasts, so it may come out in the second round of games, actually. But I personally would like to have that list just for reviewing before I watch a team play. Anyway, I should show the closing graphic, as I always forget to do. Keep an eye on us at Soccerphiles Canada. That's Soccerphiles with a PH in the middle and an S at the end. And our website there on soccerphiles.captivate.fm. And all of this information and more is in the show notes. So check that for links to our website and previous podcasts that we've done on these teams and players. And I hope you enjoy the cup. Bye-bye.